Chapter 4, Part K of Greener Than You Think. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Greener Than You Think by Ward Moore. Chapter 4, Part K. The coming of spring was awaited with grim foreboding. But the grass was not bound by any man-made almanac, and unable to contain itself till the melting of the snow, again leaped the barrier of the Mississippi, this time near Natchez, and ran through the South like water from a sloshed dishpan. The prized reforms of the black legislatures were wiped out more quickly even than their great-grandfathers had been in 1877. The worn-out cotton and tobacco lands offered hospitable soil, while cypress swamps and winter-swollen creeks pumped vitality into the questing runners. Southward and eastward it spread, waiting only the opening of the first pussy willow and the showing of the first crocus to jump northward and meet the western advance there. The dwindling remnants of cohesion and self-control existing before now disappeared completely. The capital was moved to Portland, Maine. Local law and order vanished. The great gangs took over the cities and extracted what tribute they could from the impoverished inhabitants. Utilities ceased functioning entirely. What little goods remained were obtainable only by barter, and epidemic after epidemic decreased the population to fit the shrinking boundaries. Brother Paul, deprived of the radio, now multiplied himself infinitely in the person of his disciples, preaching unremittingly against resistance, even by thought, to the oncoming grass. Mother Joan's infrequent public appearances attracted enormous crowds as she proclaimed, "Oh, be joyful! Give your souls to Jesus and your bodies to the grass! I am the forerunner, and after me will come the ox. Rejoice, brothers and sisters, for this is the end of all your suffering and misery." On foot, or rarely with the aid of a horse or mule, the panic-stricken population marched northward and eastward. Canadian officials, anxious to apply immigration controls with the greatest possible latitude, were thrust aside as though their existence were an irrelevance. Along the lower reaches of the St. Lawrence, the refugees came like locusts to devour the substance of the habitants. Into empty Ungava and almost equally empty Labrador the hardier ones pushed, armed like their forebears with only axe and shotgun. Northward and eastward, beyond the Arctic Circle and onto the polar ice they trickled, seeking some place which promised security from the grass. Passenger rates to Europe or South America, formerly at a premium, now shot to unparalleled heights. I wound up my own affairs, disappointed at the failure to find a use for the grass, but still keeping it in view as a future objective, and arranged for the removal of the Florida factory to Brazzaville. Heeding the cabled importunities of Stuart Thario, I risked my life to travel once more into the interior to see Joe and persuade him to come back with me. I found them in a small Pennsylvania town in the Alleghenies, once a company-owned mining village. The grass, advancing rapidly, was just beyond the nearest mountain ridge, replacing the jagged Appalachian horizon with a softer and more ominous one. They appeared serene and content, Joe's haggard look of the winter erased. "I'm in the middle of the third movement, A.W.," he told me, like a man who had no time to waste on preliminaries or indirections. "Here." He thrust an enormous manila envelope at me. "Here are the first two movements. There are no copies, and I cannot trust the mails or any other messenger to get them out. If possible, I'll send the old man the third movement as soon as it's finished. And the fourth, if I have time. But take the first two, anyway. At least I'll know they're preserved." "Joe! Florence!" I exclaimed. "This is ridiculous! Insane! Come back with me!" Silence. "You can compose just as well in Europe, if it's so important to you. In France, say, or England, away from this danger and discomfort. There is no doubt the country is finished. Come to safety while you can." Florence was busy with a stack of music paper and offered no comment. Joe put his hand for a second on my shoulder, and then turned away, talking with his eyes fixed out the window in the direction of the grass. General Herkimer had both legs shot off at the Battle of Oriskany. He made his men put his back to a tree stump and with a flintlock rifle fired at the enemy until he bled to death. Commodore Lawrence, mortally wounded, had only one order. School books hold the words of John Paul Self-Named Jones and of Hiram Ulysses Grant. Even yesterday the old tradition was alive. Enemy landing, issue in doubt. If I finish my symphony, when you finish your symphony, I encouraged. If you finish your symphony, said Florence quietly. If I finish my symphony, it must be in Maine, New Hampshire, Vermont. His speech took on a hushed, abstracted tone. Massachusetts, Rhode Island, or Connecticut. New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania. His voice rose higher. Maryland, Virginia, or West Virginia. His shoulders shook and he seemed to be crying. North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, Florida. I left them, convinced the madness of the country had found still another victim. That night, I thankfully boarded the European clipper for the last time. The next day, I sank back into civilization as into a comfortable bed. The United States, July 4th, NANA. A decent respect for the opinion of mankind dictates the content of this summary. Less than 2 centuries past, a small group of smugglers, merchants, and planters united in an insurrection which in its course gathered to itself such an accreta of riffraff, debtors, convicts, adventurers, careerists, foreigners, theoreticians, idealists, revolutionaries, soldiers of fortune, and restless men, that at the height of their numbers they composed, with their sympathizers, perhaps 1/3 of the people in the country. After 7 years of inept war, in which they had all the breaks, including that of a half-hearted enemy, they established upon this continent a new nation. Some of the phrases thrown off in the heat of propaganda were taken seriously, and despite shocked opposition, written into basic law. The cryptogram is readable backward or forward, straightaway or upside down. Unparalleled resources, the fortuitous historical moment, the tide of immigration drawing on the best of the world, the implicit good in conception necessarily resulting in the explicit best of being, high purpose, inventive genius, exploratory urge, competitive spirit, fraternal enthusiasm. What does the ascription matter if the end product was clear for all to see? Is it not fitting that a nation calling itself lightly God's country, meaning a land abundantly favored by nature, should find its dispatch through an act of the benefactor become understandably irritable? This is not to pose the editorial question of justice, but to remember in passing the girdled forests, abused prairies, gullied lands, the stupidly harnessed plains, wasted coal, gas, petroleum, the millions of tons of rich mud denied hungry soil by Mississippi levees and forced profitlessly into the salt sea. A small part, a heartbreakingly small part of the United States remains at this moment. In a matter of weeks, even this little must be overrun, stilled and covered green as all graves are. Scattered through the world there will be Americans, participants in a bitter diaspora. For them, and for their children to be instructed zealously in the formalities of an antique civilization, there can be no 4th of July, no Thanksgiving. Only one holiday will remain, and that continue through all the year. Its name, of course, is Memorial Day. W.R.L. This was the last dispatch from the once great editor. It was assumed generally that he had perished with so many others. It was only some time later I heard a curious story, for whose authenticity I cannot vouch. True to the flippant prediction of Jackson Goots, Lafacici returned to the church into which he had been born. He went further and became a lay brother, taking upon himself the obligation of silence. Though an old man, he stayed close to the advancing grass, giving what assistance and comfort he could to the refugees. The anecdotes of his sudden appearance in typhus-ridden camps, mute and gaunt, hastening with water for the